Hi again then guys, and welcome to, of course, another breakdown from the 1.28 batch of cars that came to the game, and this one, to kind of show my hand relatively early on in the review, was a car which I completely had a 180 degree turnaround on as far as this pack went, because it was the car that I probably had the least interest in, purely because it was the only car of this update to me which felt entirely unnecessary when I first saw that it was being added. Because even though I'm not a super fan of stuff like the Plymouth or the 300ZX, you can definitely make a strong case for bringing them back, especially something like the JDM cars, the NSX, the ZX. With this Porsche, to me it just felt like such a placeholder, if you will, just to add more Porsches for the sake of it. We already have a new 911. The 996 is cool because it's older. This one I was expecting to be in kind of a no man's land, because of course it's kind of a running joke that Porsche 911s don't seem to change that much with each new shape, new facelift. The reality is, of course, there's a ton of changes. It's an entirely new car that just happens to keep the same shape of its lineage alive. That's actually a pretty cool thing, not a bad thing, but it's easy to understand why people could think that. Now I will say, even though that's not the case, my initial reaction was still that I didn't want to have it in the game. Not because I don't like the car, but because, as I said, it felt like a base that we already had covered, and not just in general, but from that specific manufacturer with the newer 991 series, GT3 RS, whereas this one, it's older, it's less powerful, doubtless it would be slower. But the fact is, after driving all of the cars, tuning all of the cars from the pack, combined with some of this car's perks and advantages, it might be my favourite car of the 1.28 update. So quite the turnaround, and that happens a lot with me. Cars that I initially don't like often end up becoming my favourites. My favourite hypercar, the Ultimate Aero, my favourite car, the Ferrari FF. Initially I didn't like those. Now I love them. Now I'm not going to say that this is one of my favourite cars ever, but of this particular update, I think it's definitely one of the most useful. Now, it doesn't necessarily have the domination factor in terms of cash earning that something like the Mazda has, but what it does have is brilliant all-round ability, and here's the crucial thing, for a significantly lower price than the existing 911. Because the older one is good, it's even cheaper, it's 140,000, it has the fantastic advantage of being able to detune it to N300, which is brilliant. With this one, on the other hand, it does what the 991 can do, which is the newer shape, but it does it better, because it can apply to the same categories of car, but it does it for a lower price. And I would actually go so far as to say that I think this is a better handling car than the new one. Now, when you actually put them head to head in a battle, the newer one would probably, I suspect at least, still be the quicker of the two. I may be wrong, but I think it probably would. That's generally how it works. The newer the Porsche, the quicker they get. That's kind of how you'd hope it would work. But there was just something about this car. As soon as I started driving it here at the Nordschleife, it caught me immediately. I love it now. The handling is fantastic. It's not necessarily the most beginner-friendly thing around, although I am going to recommend using this car for earning money for beginners, and I'm doing a tune for that tomorrow afternoon, so stick around for that. And even earlier on today, of course, I did the circuit tune for it in N400, and again, it is a very competitive car. It's just that Porsches, and especially their derivatives like Roofs, Gambalas, 9FFs, they have a reputation of being a little bit twitchy, a little bit leery sometimes, and of course that tends to be the older ones in particular, but even the newer ones, they can bite back. That's the inherent disadvantage, you could say, with a rear engine, rear drive car, modern or otherwise. It just handles differently to what you're expecting, especially if you don't have the advantage that the turbo has of all-wheel drive. Now, the 911 of the 997 shape and onward really reminds me of the Nissan GTR. And I'm not talking just about like its performance on paper or necessarily its lap times, I mean the spirit of the car. It has a similar vibe to what the GTR has, and in a kind of similar way the C7 Corvette Stingray does also, but not as much. And that is that they are cars in the exotic category which are as fast as supercars often, but they're not quite supercars. And for those who would argue that the Nissan GTR is a supercar, it's not. Nissan themselves market it as a SuperSports car. That was officially on one of their adverts recently, but that's a side tangent. But they are cars that are in the SuperSports category, but they can beat supercars for a fraction of the cost, and the crucial similarity for me is that they are so well engineered and they've been so well refined over the years, and of course this applies to the 911, the Corvette and the Skyline lineage, that after each new generation, each new facelift, they become better and better to the point where the specs themselves don't need to make a huge jump in order for the performance to feel significantly better than the previous one. If you compare, for instance, what the GTR can do to other cars with a similar amount of power, even if you tuned up a Skyline to a similar level, it wouldn't necessarily be quite as good. In fact, it may be significantly worse than how quick the GTR can be. Likewise with the 911, you could tune up an older one to a similar level, potentially make it as quick, but it wouldn't do it straight out of the box like this one can. And of course, you would hope that would apply with any car. Newer technology, better development, etc. You learn from experience. But there are few cars I think that you can feel such a huge difference with than with stuff like a 911 or a GTR. They make such huge leaps with each new version, and to me that kind of first caught my interest with the 997, the GT3, and especially the Turbo, which was incredibly quick for its price at the time, back in around, 2006, 2007 I believe. This one is of course the facelift. It's not the Turbo anyway, it's the GT3, but I love this car, and one of the best advantages in GT Sports specifically is it's so much cheaper than the newer car. Despite the fact that you can run it in all the same classes, you can tune it to give you similar kind of performance, it's at least as competitive, at least as OP, but instead of paying 250 grand, you're looking at 160. That's a massive difference. And in fact, it literally takes it from the supercar level price tag of the existing GT3 at $250,000, that is supercar territory, down to a much more modest SuperSports level, around 100 to 200 grand. So it's perfect now, and you can use it to earn tons of cash, you can use it as a track car, you could use it as a straight line missile if you wanted to as well. It's just a great all-rounder. I like this car a lot more than I was expecting to. It's not the most beginner-friendly thing around, although even with my tune earlier on today, I think beginners could get a handle on it relatively quickly. And so I'm very happy with this car. It's a car that pleasantly surprised me. It's very competitive, definitely one of the most competitive of the pack for its particular class. So if you haven't bought this one yet, maybe if you felt like I did, that it feels just a little bit unnecessary, then try to get past that. Give the car the benefit of the doubt, and if you do, especially if you tie it in with some of the tuning that I've done for it, like the circuit setup earlier on today, I guarantee you will enjoy it a lot more than you're probably expecting to. But overall, it's a great car, great addition to the pack, and that's not something which I expected to say. So, cool car, and of course I'll see you guys next time, but for now, as always, thanks for watching.